I'm in danger. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show. And today we have something pretty cool. This is the second episode in my Griso review series here. If you missed the first one, basically it was on a Gen 1 Griso, and it was my raw first impressions, because how often do you get to ride the entire life cycle of a motorcycle in one day? So for this one, what we're gonna do is we're actually going to take the full day in the saddle on the Gen 2, and we're gonna talk about this motorcycle from a couple of different angles. First of all, this motorcycle relative to the Gen 1. Secondly, the Griso as a platform. And third, is this the next motorcycle I'm about to buy? Because this thing costs $7,200. It looks awesome. It has less than 4,000 miles on it, and I really, really want it. So, yeah. Like I said, I'm in danger. Let's hit the road. Let's start off in the Twisties and see how this thing shakes down. Now, the biggest thing I can say about the Griso platform through a twisty road is it's not the most nimble thing in the whole wide world. Don't get me wrong. It's doing the sport bike thing. It's definitely going around the twisties, and it's relatively adept. I would certainly say that the Gen 2 Griso has a lot more capability on the side of the tire. Now, let's talk generally about the platform before we dive any further into Gen 1, Gen 2. So the biggest thing about this bike is that it has a very long wheelbase. My guess is that that is down to the shape of the motor and how they had to build the rest of the bike around it. It's quite a long reach. As I said about Griso 1.0, it definitely feels like I'm sitting on the live wire. The seating position is very similar between the two, but that's kind of where the similarities end. Yeah, I'm looking down at the same dash, but I'll tell you, the motor sits in a very different place between the two bikes. The second gen Griso, the Quattro Valvo, or Valvio, or however they say it, it says it on the side of the motor, it's a lot more rev happy. It's the kind of motor that I would want. Don't get me wrong, the 2-valve is actually really nice, and the sound it makes, I think, personally, is better. It just sounds a little bit more beefy and burly. This definitely has a more sporting edge to it, and you can definitely tell. It's not that it's bad down low. Like if I were to drop it let's go up a gear here. We're down at 3,000 RPM. I still have a lot of torque to get out of a corner, but I don't feel like I need to grab the next gear right away. On the 2-valve, the Gen 1, I feel like I'm usually grabbing the clutch right around 5,500 RPM. It feels like I'm shifting a Harley. On the 4-valve, Gen 2, I'm more inclined to stay in the top of the power band. That's definitely where this bike feels the happiest. And personally, if I was doing a sporty thing, that's what I want. I want my motor to feel happy at higher RPM. Now, side to side, this bike is still pretty lethargic. It's a bit of a brawl. It's helped along by the fact that we still have very wide handlebars. But generally, the Griso platform, it doesn't feel like it wants to dart side to side. But what do you expect from a bike that looks like this, you know? I would say similar things of the R9T. It really doesn't dive side to side super well. However, like the Gen 1, when you get this thing on the side of the tire, it's very capable. It holds its line well, the brakes perform admirably, especially given the weight. But it's certainly a brawl. It's not an effortless motorcycle to ride, and you know what? I kind of appreciate that. In terms of Gen 1, Gen 2, in the twisty road, I have to take Gen 2. It's definitely more pulled together. It's a lot more composed, I would say, and the motor's way more playful. However, that's not to say that Gen 1 doesn't have a lot going for it on a twisty road. I just think that this is a better package. Now, with that being said, let's pull this bike over and start talking about specs on the Griso here.
Before we get into those specs, I need to take a quick second to shout out our sponsor for today's video, Insta360 and their X3 camera. You've probably seen it on the handlebars of every bike I ride, unless you put these videos on in the background and do something more productive with your time. But this little camera is what allows me to get some really unique shots in seconds. Let me show you.
All you gotta do is just bolt it down to, foot pegs or whatever. Pull out this stick, screw it on. And even though it might seem wobbly out here on the side of the motorcycle, because it's got image stabilization, you're not going to have to worry about it bobbing around because the camera's just going to sort it out.
And if you're worried about editing the footage, don't be. It takes seconds in editing software like Premiere, but if you're not into all that, you can edit it right from the app and have shots prepped for YouTube, Instagram, or wherever you want to share them. If you want to check out the X3 camera for yourself, click that link down below and support the channel at the same time. And with that, let's get back into those specs.
So some specs on this bad boy right here. We're dealing with an 1151cc V-twin. I'm gonna let you guys argue whether it's transverse or longitudinally mounted in the comments, because whether I say one or the other, half of you are gonna tell me I'm wrong. Yeah, it's air and oil cooled. It's making 108 horsepower and it's making 80 foot-pounds of torque while weighing in at 489 pounds dry. Now, relative to Griso 1.0, that is a serious bump in power versus 87 horsepower off the old one versus 108. You definitely feel the difference. This is a much more potent motor and it likes to rev out a lot more. Now, mounting up on this motorcycle to talk about ergos, very little has changed here between the two bikes. The reach to the bars, it's pretty long. If I were to sit upright, I have a straight, well, there's no bend in there. My arms are completely straight, reaching to the handlebars. However, it's a pretty natural spot for me to just kind of reach up and my hands land exactly where they're supposed to be. Now, if I were to put my foot up, it's a little bit more aggressive. This is where I would say the biggest change has been. It feels like the peg height is a little bit higher. My knee is just a hair more compact on this bike. It's weird. I feel like if I were to drop the pegs just a smidgen, it would be an infinitely more comfortable motorcycle. Now, let's talk some pros and cons on this bad boy. So first things first, I gotta shout out the looks on this. I know it looks an awful lot like an R9T, but I like the black and silver colorway. I like the red accents on the wheels. I like the red accent on that piece of plastic right above the motor. It's a very sleek looking motorcycle, and I think this is one of the coolest, most minimalistic style bikes I've seen in a hot minute. I don't see a bunch of wires and stuff poking out. It's a really clean bike. I'm not gonna call it a cafe racer, but it's definitely got that vibe. One thing that I wasn't expecting to love is the transmission. I personally have issues with a lot of Moto Guzzi transmissions. The transmission on this shifts a lot more like a Harley Davidson than it does a sport bike, which frankly, I prefer. I prefer a more clunky, feedbacky transmission. I've said it 1,000 times versus something that's really light and snicks into gear super well. There's a place for that, but I really prefer to know when I hit my shifts. That's just how I am. Kawasaki still #1 in terms of transmission feel. I was expecting this to be a bit of a mixed bag. It was actually really surprising. One thing I'm not in love with, the front brakes on this bike. The brakes generally, they're Brembos. I don't know if it's the pads, I don't know if it's the fluid. They're braided steel lines. They feel a little bit numb to me. I'm not sure what's going on there. Maybe it's just the master cylinder is letting down the rest of the system, but the feeling through the lever is not exactly what I was hoping for out of, a premium Italian motorcycle. Another thing I'm not a huge fan of on this motorcycle, everything that's kind of ugly is on the high side of the bike. It's on the right side of the bike. This is where, you have your pretty stuff like your exhaust and your single-sided swing arm so that you just see the hub of the wheel and stuff. Put it on the other side, Moto Guzzi. You've already got the engine on sideways. Put the thing on the other side, because the other side of this motorcycle, the left side, looks so pretty, but it's always the one that's down. I know it sounds odd, but if you're not gonna flip everything over, put the kickstand on the right side so that the high side of the motorcycle has the pretty stuff. I don't want to look at the oil cooler. I want to look at the exhaust. I want to look at the pipes because the pipes are really cool. Why do I have to look at the ugly stuff? Now, with all that being said, let's get the Griso here out on the highway and see how it compares to the Gen 1 and whether or not this could replace my Ducati as a potential traveling motorcycle. Now, this is actually one of my favorite spots to show a motorcycle pulling onto the highway. It's this really nice long on-ramp. So I'm gonna let these cars get ahead of us a little bit, just so that you can see what the power is like on this thing. And if you haven't seen the previous video, go ahead and check that out. But we're in, I don't know what gear, but we're in the middle of the RPM band. This is a much zippier motorcycle, I'm not gonna lie. The way that the motor revs out is a lot more satisfying, and it's just, holy cow, look at all that traffic. Good Lord. Well, you're just gonna have to take my word for a lot of this stuff today, because good God, is that traffic bad. This is the hard part about filming literally all day. But I have ridden this thing on the highway plenty up to this point. So, first and foremost, this motorcycle's definitely a little bit more cramped in the lower half. That's one thing Griso 1.0 has over the 2.0 here. For whatever reason, I don't know if it's just different pegs that were on there, but I keep coming back to my lower half is not as comfortable. The seat feels basically identical. The reach to the bars is identical, but my feet feel higher. Maybe I'll have to look at Griso 1.0 again just to see if they did something different with the foot pegs. Now, I will say, in terms of highway stability, again, you're going to have to take my word for it. This thing, very stable. You would think long wheelbase, long, kind of heavy weight, long motor, distributed low down. It's a very stable platform on the highway. I've had it up north of posted speed limits, and it didn't wiggle or wobble one bit. It tracks super duper straight. One thing I am a little bit irked by is a general lack of cruise control. I'm not going to dog on it too much, but it would be nice. Even just popping a throttle lock on here would certainly help out, because this is definitely a motorcycle that you could cruise pretty long distances on. I would have no problem riding like an hour and a half out to some of the really cool twisties way out in the hills on this thing. One problem with this platform generally, air and oil cooled. Air and oil cooled only work so long as air and is moving over the cylinders and through the oil cooler. If air is not moving over the cylinders or through the oil cooler, it no get cool. It's 104 degrees outside right now, and I definitely have my concerns about this motorcycle not necessarily overheating, but getting hotter than it should. Luckily, we're not, sitting and stopping, which is good. But if you're in like red light to red light traffic in this kind of heat, you might want to look at a water-cooled motorcycle that, or be able to run between lanes or turn the bike off when you come to a stop. The seat's wide and comfy. The handlebars are wide and comfy. My top half is great. The only real complaint I have with this thing on the highway is my bottom half. If my bottom half was a little bit more, if my knees weren't as bent, I'd be way happier. But beyond that, I really like this thing. I would definitely take this over my Hyper on the highway. But with that being said, let's get the fuck out of this traffic and answer some Discord questions, shall we? There, see what I mean about this being the prettier side of the bike? Sucks that I'm leaning this way because it's more uncomfortable, but come on, Moto Guzzi, this is the pretty side. At least give me a center stand by default. I'm sure there's one in the aftermarket. Anyway, let's dive into the Discord questions and answers here. Remember, if you want to participate in segments like this, all of the information is down in the description below. You join up on the Patreon, you get access to the Discord server, live streams, behind the scenes content, discounts on merch, all kinds of fun stuff that is down in the description below. And let's dive on in with Johnny Mish the Messiah, who owns a V85 TT, if I'm not mistaken. How quickly did you slap your wallet on the table when you got back from the test ride, and which one did you buy? So, spoiler alert, very quickly. I was actually pretty much on the finish line before I saw this bike. I've seen pictures of it forever, and I've seen only a few videos on the internet, but as soon as I pulled away on this, I was like, okay, yeah, we're good. As far as whether or not I'm gonna buy it, kind of depends. Don ATX with an interesting question here. How does it compare to the older gen MT10? It doesn't really. It's completely different kind of motorcycle. Much more in line with something like the R9T than the MT10 or any of the other 1000-ish cc naked bikes. I would say it's easy to fall into that trap, but when you look at the bike itself, it kind of tells you what it's all about. Full Metal Corgi, what is the most Guzzi of Guzzis? Honestly, it's just probably any Guzzi. They're all a bit Guzzi-y. But I would argue this is probably one of the most sought after ones. Maybe that and the MGX21, the Flying Fortress. I can't really think of any other ones off the top of my head that, like, the second they hit a dealership showroom floor, they get snapped up. This is definitely one of the most desirable Guzzis, I would say. Nescafe, how do the miles per gallon compare to your Ducati? Good question. I would say that in terms of just outright smiles, I think the Ducati gives you more because it's a slightly more exciting bike. However, this is just super unique and it's a lot more up my alley than, you know, a super sporty bike. Like, I feel like I have to push the Ducati to really enjoy it. This I can just sort of cruise. Minaru, Spite, why is your engine mounted sideways? I would argue that your engine is mounted sideways, sir or madam. Sir, probably. White and blue, Spite, is one of the Grisos enough to satisfy the itch for an MT10 until it gets easier to import one? So for those of you who don't know, I think my dream bike right now is the MT-01 from Yamaha. They did not bring it to the States. It's a naked bike with a 5-speed 1700cc Warrior engine in it. Very beefy, beastly motorcycle. I don't think that this has nearly as brawler, outright just angry motor that the MT-01 does. However, it's a great package and it gets me that vibe. I definitely enjoy this. I don't think it knocks the MT-01 off of my must-own list though. Last one from Chemical. Who is this bike for and what kind of energy does it have? Well, I've answered some of that before, but that gives me a good opportunity to switch it out into my final thoughts. Let's get back on the road one more time and start wrapping things up for the day.
Today has officially been Italian bike overload, man. I am just absolutely grisoed out, shall we say. But I have learned a lot about this platform, and it's really kind of cool to be able to ride 2 generations of the same bike back to back and see where the differences are, because you can read them on a page, but you only get so much by that kind of understanding. You just don't, you can't really feel the differences. Let's start wrapping up my thoughts here. So the first and foremost thing is these 2 Grisos are for 2 different customers, man. The 1.0 Gen 1, that one's very much a cruiser. It's very chilled out. Its motor's a lot like what's in the original Motard 1100, although not as potent. Slow revving, but with gobs of torque and not a ton of horsepower, and it doesn't really rev very quickly. This one, on the other hand, much sportier, and it likes to live its life in the top half of the RPM band. In terms of handling differences, I would say 2.0 dips in a little bit faster, but not not significantly so. It's definitely a little bit lighter somehow. It feels like a more refined version of the first gen. I feel like the brakes are very similar, honestly, which is weird. Maybe some different pads on this would help, but you know, all of those are splitting hairs. Let's talk about the Griso generally to round things out here. This is an awesome motorcycle, and Moto Guzzi needs to bring it back right the fuck now. Don't get me wrong, the Mandello's badass, but I could only imagine what that Mandello motor in this platform would feel like. Oh my god, would that be amazing. I also think it would be more styled for a lot of people's looks. I think a lot of people look at something like the Mandello and they're like, yeah, it's cool, but you know, it's definitely more sport touring. This is definitely more sport, and they have to bring this motorcycle back, man. I know a lot of people are super excited about the Stelvio, but I need a Gen 3 Griso, dude. It's such a nice platform, and for being as long as it is, I really like the handling, and it's a comfortable motorcycle. It feels like it's sized really well for me. You know, my lower half's not super happy, but the rest of me is. And I don't feel like I have to ride the tar out of this bike to have fun with it. It's definitely got some chill to it, but it's just, I don't know, this thing it's juicy, it's delectable, it gets my giblets quivering. And it sounds great. It sounds awesome. Now, here's the ultimate question. Am I going to get rid of the Hyperstrada for a Griso? Specifically, this one. Would I get it rid of for the original one? Nah. The original one's cool, but this is the bike to get, in my opinion. So, am I going to get rid of the Ducati for this guy? Well, that's kind of up to the dealership. I am going to try. I'm 100% going to try. So, who knows? This bad boy here might be coming home with me. And I think that's honestly the highest marks I can give it, is riding a bike at a dealership and being like, okay, let's go do some paperwork and see if we can make this work. Oh, I fucking love this thing. Oh, it's just the way that it makes its power is nice. It's torque first. You don't have to rev it out. I like it. I like it a lot. I guess, guys, stay tuned and let's see whether or not the Griso comes home. If it does come home with me, you'll just be seeing plenty of Griso goofiness, because this is very cool. This is definitely the kind of bike where I could see it just being around forever. It's got some staying quality. It's not a flash in the pan. It's a slow simmer. I really like this thing. I really do. Well, guys, I'll catch you in the next one, and stay tuned to see if the Griso comes home with your old boy Spite, and whether or not the Ducati goes back to AF1 after a year. Catch you guys in the next one. See you later.